Hello subscribers, today I'm looking at a video by Mindshift. I have never heard of this YouTuber before, but this looked like an interesting video. It's called 7 Reasons Why Heaven Fails. I suspect there will be quite a bit of straw manning heaven, and I look forward to finding out exactly what straw man he has in store for us.
But I want to focus on it because I think it takes all of the excuses out. Okay, you don't want to admit that hell is unjust? Fine. Ridiculous, but fine. You want to believe that there is no hell because that makes it easier to accept God's morality?
Okay, right off the bat he makes some bad takes about the nature of hell. I don't want to focus on this too much since it's not the topic of the video, but hell is very just. Annihilation would seem to be more unjust, although to be fair, whatever God decides to do would, by definition, be just. God is moral regardless of which version is true.
There are many different concepts of heaven as well. How funny that we have this one true God, this one true religion, this perfect holy book communicating God's words to us, and yet we can't agree on heaven and hell, the afterlife, the whole pretense to the reason we need to do something in this life in a correct and specific way. That makes a great deal of sense.
We cannot agree whether to put pineapple on pizza, even though God clearly made it to go on pizza. So what is your point? People disagree. That is human nature. And it's not a pretense, it's a motivation. The pretense would be to obey God.
Yes, some people believe that it is a soul versus an actual spiritual body versus our physical bodies being reincarnated, etc., up into the heavens. That leads to their own set of problems. But most people think that they will be in heaven in some physical sense.
And immediately we hit our first straw man or two. First, no Christian believes in reincarnation. We believe in resurrection. Second, and this one I saw coming, but heaven is not where we will spend the afterlife. God will make a new heavens and new earth which will last forever. These are minor points, I'm sure, but we have to keep things in perspective because Mindshift won't.
And there are things we also don't get. There are no tears, death, sorrow, or sin. Those are 4 things in Revelation that are very clear we do not have in heaven.
Well, the verse he is alluding to is Revelation 21:4, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Notice this verse doesn't actually say no sin, but I'm not saying there would be. I'm just trying to be precise where Mindshift failed to do so.
Let's start off simple and with a really easy one. How about just eternal monotony? I'm talking boredom. I'm talking the very first thought most of us had as kids when we heard about heaven.
What a boring kid you must have been to equate eternal life with eternal boredom. For some of us, monotony is a good thing. We like things to be predictable. It's relaxing. And if you don't like that, it's a very simple fix. Just leave your mansion, go out and socialize, play some games, whatever. If you're bored in heaven, you have only yourself to blame.
Many of us were told about the worship part, that we would endlessly, eternally be worshiping God. Now, maybe some of that are correlating worship incorrectly, and we thought of the praise and worship parts of service at church, and we thought, oh, I don't want to do that forever. Maybe worshiping God is just living perfectly. Maybe that brings glory to Him. But the actual descriptions we get of worship are closer to the first one. They are about songs that are sang, instruments that are played, our bodily position of being bent over and bowed down, etc. That does not sound fun.
Then don't do it. You haven't given any verses that would indicate that you would be forced to do this against your will.
There will be no greater thing you could do for eternity than praise God. I'm going to skip the narcissistic parts of how ridiculous it is that this God who wants a relationship with us is having an end goal where the vast amount of all time, like if eternity is real, if infinity is a concept, and you live...
Why are you still talking when you said you were gonna skip that bad take?
120 years, take it to the max here. It doesn't matter. It's like nothing. It's literally more comparable to 0 than any other number. That means that God's intention, His design for all time, is just to have His robotic slaves worshiping Him. Why would He need this? Why would He want this? I'm serious. Like, if you really zoom out, it makes no sense, and it sounds absolutely awful.
He doesn't need it, and nobody says He does. It is better to give than receive. God gives us life in heaven, and what can we give Him besides our worship? If heaven is supposed to be the best, then we should have a way to thank God and give Him praise. It would be rude of God to not allow us to worship Him.
that we're going to run into a series of repeatable events forever. I really think a lot of people who haven't thought about deep time or haven't read mathematical books on the concept of infinity and things like this, it's an impossible thing to conceptualize. But there are some visualizations and some kind of thought experiments that one can do to help get them further down the road. And the further down the road you go towards the concept of infinity, the more you realize there's no good version of it. There can't be. Nothing can go on forever and be a good thing.
That makes no sense. He started talking about infinity as a concept in math, but now equates that with some degree of goodness. It's a complete non sequitur. Many things can go on for eternity and be eternally good. For example, kittens, a cool breeze on a hot day, and loving affection from your significant other, and many others. If you mean nothing can be good for eternity without stop, then sure, that applies to most things, but that is not what happens in the resurrection. In fact, it would be a contradiction to say we have a cool breeze on a hot day every second of every day and also a hot jacuzzi on a cold day, both of which are good things that will always be good. But some things can't fit in that list, like breathing. I can breathe all day every day for all eternity and never get tired of doing so.
You'll live every possible occurrence of anything that can be done in heaven, a billion, trillion, quadrillion, Google times a billion times over forever, and it will be just the beginning, just the blink of an eye of how many more times you'll do it again.
I thought you were supposed to be trying to convince me it's bad.
A lot of the excuses for this are, again, going back to, but you don't understand, we've never been in the very presence of God. We could spend an eternity worshiping him, and it would be amazing. Well, this then leads to that second point that we've already mixed in a little bit, which is slavery. Heaven sounds like eternal submission.
Well, it is eternal submission, but you're always gonna be in submission to something. For instance, right now you are in submission to gravity and to the laws of physics. Funnily enough, Evangelion, which I just did a review on but couldn't post due to copyright issues, made a good point about this very topic. I won't show the full clip, but I will try to at least play the audio.
What is this? A world of nothing? A world with nobody in it?
This is the world of perfect freedom.
Freedom?
Perfect freedom. A world in which you have no restriction.
Is this really freedom?
Yes, this is what it is.
However, this world has nothing in it.
Unless I do something?
Right. Unless you do or think of something.
But I don't know what to do or think of.
He is uncertain.
He has no self-image to orient himself.
There's nothing solid here.
It is a world in which there are no obstacles, no anything.
This is a world in which you can do anything you wish.
And yet, you are still afraid, aren't you?
Don't you know what it is that you want to do?
What should I do?
Let me give you a restriction.
There, now you have a top and bottom.
That you have lost a degree of your freedom. You may no longer fly. You must stand upon the earth.
But now you feel easier, don't you?
Because you have less to trouble your mind. And now you can walk.
Right? Can I choose to leave? That would be question number one. Can I opt out? Can I choose oblivion at some point? Maybe after 2 billion years, I'm just really done with this concept. Can I leave?
We do not have the information to say whether you can or not, but it is safe to say you won't want to.
No, I can't leave. Well, Brandon, it's not so much that you can't leave, it's that God wouldn't have you have the desire to leave. So God's controlling me. God's controlling my mind. God's controlling my will and my desires. He's forcing it. He's compelling it.
First major straw man. He could have just said, but Brandon, you wouldn't want to leave. But instead he makes it an action of God to form his will. Also, he can say God is forcing us. And he's gonna continue burning this straw man for a while.
But I'd encourage you to really think about if hell didn't exist at all and someone just told you at the end of your life, here's what happens. You go, you get a new body, you don't feel pain anymore, you don't feel sorrow anymore. You're perfect. You're a perfect being. You can't grow. You can't get better at things. You can't develop a new skill or hobby. You can't improve.
Who says you can't get new skills and hobbies? And who says we can't improve? No one. No one says that. We can always be closer to God, and even if we were to plateau, so what? We could still have a great time being the best we could be.
And your entire existence is simply to shout over and over, holy, holy is the name.
Citation needed.
And if you really, no consequences, had the option to just stop existing after a certain amount of time, wouldn't that be preferable? Wouldn't you like to at least reserve that as an option?
No, never. That is a remarkably dumb option. If you think non-existence is ever a good option, then you have not thought about it at all. Non-existence is not going to sleep and just not waking up. It's not existing. to even be able to sleep in the first place.
You're somehow an individual in heaven. You still get to pursue your passions and hobbies. How? First of all, the Bible doesn't even tell us that we can do that.
It doesn't say we can't.
Second of all, if we can't be sad, then we can't ever have messed up, right? Like if I want to get really good at wood carving and I mess up, what does that look like in heaven? What does a mistake look like in heaven? How can one learn? How can someone improve?
Do you seriously cry every time you make a mistake? Did you cry after making this video?
I'm gonna cry.
We will have an eternity of learning. Learning does not mean being sad. That is ridiculous.
I can only do so many hobbies. Like, do you understand everything that you can ever imagine is finite? We have a finite amount of things we can be interested in or do. We have a finite amount of times we can do them before we lose interest. We have a finite amount of growth that we can do in any particular subject. This simply doesn't work. Eternity is never going to be a good thing, no matter how you spin it.
This is just not true. First, look at speedrunners. They can't play the same game for years, while people like myself can only play it until it's beaten once, then I have to wait a while before playing again. But there is your first clue about what I'm gonna say next. I could, for example, play the piano for 1,000,000 years, get bored of it, and then play the violin for 1,000,000 years, get bored of that, then play the bagpipes for 1,000,000 years, then spend 1,000,000 years getting my hearing back. Then I could say, you know what? I haven't played the piano in a while, I think I'll do that again. Anything I get bored of, I could just take a break from and take it up again later. It's not a problem. But isn't that a question of monotony? Which was your first point? Weren't we on the second point, which was supposed to be slavery?
I don't want to live forever. I honestly do not believe there is any good version of heaven. If it's a choice and I get to talk to some creator at the end of all of this, I don't care who the creator is or what his plan or her plan or its plan is for an afterlife. I would honestly prefer at some point, maybe I want to check it out for 500 years, but at some point, I want the option to not exist, to not be conscious, to not participate.
You have the choice to not be conscious. Now, it's called sleeping, and it's very different from not existing, and you would never choose it.
This leads us to point 3, which is the free will issue.
Isn't that just slavery again? You already tried that.
Okay, so I can't suffer, and I am good. I'm good all the time. Everything I do and say is good, because it has to be, because otherwise it might bring suffering to me or to other people. It could bring sadness. It could bring sin. There's no sin in heaven. If there's no sin in heaven, then there's 100% only good moral things according to God. That right there, 100% means there's no free will in heaven.
No, it doesn't. That's like saying because I watch a recording of some football team winning the Super Bowl, that they did not have free will to win the game, because they won the game. Just because you won't sin in heaven does not mean you didn't choose not to sin.
Why does God let bad things happen? Well, you don't understand. It's not really God doing it or letting it happen here on earth, Brandon. He had to allow free will. We have to understand pain to understand pleasure. We have to be able to reject him so that he doesn't force us. God wouldn't want us just to be robots, okay? And that's the excuse for all of the atrocities on this earth. And if you really are too historically ignorant or too in your bubble to understand the realities of the horror of this world and of the history of this world, to think that that is somehow a justifiable excuse, I feel sorry for you.
First of all, free will would not be the only reason, but it is good enough. Second, you are forgetting heaven. The eternal bliss that make those atrocities you're referring to seem as nothing, the topic of your video.
An all-powerful God could and should do better.
How? Give us some specifics. How should God do better? Especially when eternal happiness isn't even good enough for you. Everyone gets their just rewards, eternal damnation for the wicked, and eternal joy for the righteous. But that's not good enough for you. Get out of here with that nonsense.
That means something is controlled, either our desire or our will, our ability. A lot of people will say, Brandon, again, you don't understand. In the presence of God, you won't want to sin. That is such a cop-out.
No, it isn't. Here, let me show you. Me? You don't eat dirt in heaven. Brandon, so I don't have the free will to eat dirt. Me? No, you just won't want to. Brandon, that's such a cop-out. Sinning will be as distasteful as eating dirt, some because it was always distasteful, and some because we tasted it and don't like it. To say we wouldn't have free will because we find something distasteful is to say we don't have free will now. And if you're saying that, then you've already lost the argument.
Then why doesn't God share his presence with us here on earth? Well, because it would rob you of your free will. So his presence does rob us of free will.
Another straw man. Why would anyone say that God's presence robs us of free will? In fact, his question didn't even seem to address the problem he was creating. How is God's presence causing us to not want to sin?
Earth is 100% unnecessary because we are always going to end up in heaven with a God that is controlling us, where he does not allow for the bad things and yet still somehow provides the pleasurable things. So if it is a good thing that can exist without all of the bad things, make this make sense to me.
He is arbitrarily separating earth and heaven as if they were two different possibilities that exist like they were parallel dimensions. No, earth is a filter. We are being sifted right now. Those who trust and obey God get to be with him, and those who do not won't. It's as simple as that.
We could talk about this topic for 3 hours, for 10 hours, for 2 weeks. Like, this is endless to me.
He says it's endless to him after he already talked about the monotony of doing the same thing for eternity.
Point 4, and I'm worried I might end up redundant here, but I'm going to try to hit on the idea of perfection and of stagnation. So despite the point that we just went through, I really actually understand to a degree the concept that one cannot appreciate the good things in life without some understanding of the bad things in life. The problem is there's so much bad and suffering in this world that the good does not outweigh it, and I don't think it's as easy as a one-to-one compensation or even a heaven-to-earth compensation, right? Should 4 children have to starve to death in the next few minutes for me to appreciate the next meal that I'm going to get? Is that the idea? Is that the trade-off that has to happen? How many young women need to be raped for other women to appreciate being in a good relationship?
This so far doesn't seem to be an argument against heaven, but just a rephrasing of the problem of evil. And it's not hard to understand. If you make rape possible, then you make it possible for everyone. You have opened the floodgates, which is what you do by allowing free will. The possibility of evil is a good thing. Evil itself is not good, obviously, but the general option for it is.
It does not add up. It is horrible all on its own without adding in the heaven factor.
Without adding in the heaven factor, he says, in a video about heaven.
But on the other hand, we should need small amounts of things not working out or going wrong to be able to enjoy anything. I just imagine heaven being a place of pure stagnation. Think about how gross water becomes when it sits versus when it flows in the river. You've probably heard the old adage, if you're not growing, you're dying, kind of a thing. What is it like to be the exact same level of anything forever?
And who says you will be the exact same level? As I've already said, there will always be something for you to learn, some way that you can improve. But even then, I would not mind being stagnant. It's certainly better than any alternative out there. And especially the alternative Mindshift tried to sell.
It terrifies me. That sounds like true torture.
Annihilation should terrify you. There is nothing that could be more terrifying than non-existence.
For Christians that are so hung up on meaning, right? Where do we get our meaning in life? The only answer you can muster is God, and then you get him forever. And then what does it mean? What does it mean? It means nothing. I'm blown away that there are not more people constantly deconverting because of the very concept of heaven.
I am blown away at the sheer number of people who should become Christians, if for no other reason but to reject or avoid the concept of annihilationism that atheists must hold to.
But let's move on to a related topic here, which is identity and memory or consistency. Here's a question. Will you still have your memories from this time on earth in heaven? I doubt it, and here's why.
It wouldn't make sense to forget everything immediately, but we could forget most of it eventually.
Once again, that verse in Revelation provides us with so much ammunition. There are no tears, death, sorrow, or sin.
Again, what verse are you actually trying to quote that mentions sin?
How much sorrow do you have when you think about your life? You might have the best life ever. You might have every single thing that provides you with meaning and purpose and beauty in your life. And I bet when you think through your memories, you are filled with sorrow.
Wrong. I am filled with cringe, not sorrow. Even thinking of my past pets does not really fill me with sorrow, though I know I will see them again.
What about the people who don't know God and they're in hell or oblivion or whatever? They're not with you. If you have a memory of them, if you have a concept of who you were and what you did on this earth and the people you hurt and the people that you hurt that can't be in heaven because they didn't think or were convinced of the right thing, how do you think that's going to go? You simply cannot be able to have these memories, this same conscious continuum.
Sure I can. God says he will wipe away every tear, not that they won't exist. There will come a time where you will get over it, and at that point you will not shed any more tears for them. But there is no telling how long that will take.
Like, this is a really fun kind of ship of Theseus kind of philosophical thought experiment here. To what degree are you still you if God has to rob you of some part of yourself, some part of your desire, some part of your will, some part of your nature, some part of your memory, some part of your previous existence, right? To really be able to ensure no tears, death, sorrow, or sin.
He doesn't rob us of anything that we don't freely give him.
And to what extent can you have that done until you are no longer yourself? I believe it would happen almost immediately. It would break down. You would almost immediately have to be considered something entirely new. And for God to work all these things out, I think he's going to have to rob you of entirely who you were.
I will always be myself. As a child, I thought as a child. As an adult, I think as an adult. As a sinner, I will think as a sinner. As a righteous man, I will think righteously. For the same reason, I am still the same person who as a child kept my room at 90 degrees as I am an adult who keeps his house at 65 degrees. I will also be the same person in the resurrection as I am today, even though I may act and think very different.
If there is a God that would construct that kind of a setup, that's disgusting. If there is a God who would negate all that and just erase the memory, that is disgusting. You have been robbed of your identity. You have been robbed again of your free will. You are a slave. You are a worship slave. The Egyptians had slaves of the Israelites to work. Fine. It's nothing compared to wiping away your entire identity, forcing you to the floor, and spending eons and infinity doing nothing other than proclaiming the greatness of this God who did all those things. This is abhorrent.
How about a little fire, Scarecrow?
Keep burning that straw man. Maybe one day you'll get him.
Let's talk about fairness in heaven, right? Let's just assume however it happens, the people that make it to heaven make it to heaven. Think about the layers of unfairness that are going to exist in heaven. What is the point of a physical reward in heaven if you can't feel better about it than what someone else has?
This is an incredibly selfish way of thinking. If I am given a piece of candy, I can't enjoy it without complaining that someone else got a bigger piece. I can't enjoy it without feeling guilty that someone else didn't get any. My pleasure at this gift is not reliant on other people being worse off than me. What a horrible and selfish take this is.
So what happens about the unreached people group that get reached, and there's an 80-year-old man in the tribe, and he hears about Jesus from some missionary, and he accepts it right there, and he does one good deed, and then bam, he dies. Now he's in heaven, no fault of his own. He's the lowest tier in heaven.
So what? Lowest tier. In heaven. It is better to be a slave in heaven, not that you would be, per se, than to be a king in hell, and of course better than not existing. The materialistic language is meant for people who are still selfish sinners on earth. They need the motivation. But in the resurrection we will not care that someone else is doing better. We will be happy with what we got.
And that's it for infinity, right? Like, that's insane. You can't progress once you're there.
Progress? How? Why couldn't I just build a bigger house? Or any other improvement that I might feel like I'm missing?
How can one be more moral than another one if there's nothing immoral to ever do as a comparison guide?
Why would you want to be? This is more of that selfish, I'm only happy if I'm better than you mentality that Mindshift is arguing for.
But let's move on to our final point here, and this is, I think, the number one point of all of them. The problem with paradise is that it's not real.
Well, at least you saved your circular reasoning until the end, but I don't think I'd call this your biggest reason.
The only thing you can 100% know is that you are here now experiencing what you are experiencing, creating the life that you are creating. That's it. That's all you get. And you are going to trade that, the only sheer thing, for a completely hypothetical possibility.
I still live today. I haven't traded anything. What are you even talking about?
This robs you of your autonomy here on earth. This robs you of the beauty of the finite. This robs you of the chance to really create for yourself a life that is meaningful now, that's meaning is wrapped into the fact that it will end.
Literally none of that is true, and you haven't really made a case for why or how it would be.
This is like a reverse Pascal's wager. What if you're wrong and you waste the only life you ever get?
What makes you think my life would be wasted? If the only thing after this life is annihilation, then it's impossible to waste. There can be no achievement of any worth if my very existence will end anyway.
But for those of us that are lucky enough to live in a certain kind of first world country or have access to healthcare and a home and consistent food and shelter, then on top of that, be able to enjoy things like friends, or family, to have individual interests and hobbies and passions.
None of which goes away when I believe I will be resurrected in the last days. This is a complete non sequitur.
This is the worst trade you can ever imagine. I am honestly so sad. I see these Christians with good intentions, worshiping, spending their time doing the things they think they need to do, denying themselves often, giving up their cross, the ones that are being consistent, and they're missing out.
Missing out on what? I assure you, I am not missing anything because of my beliefs. If I were to try and say I missed out on something that I could have had if I were an atheist, then I could still say. But what would be the point? I won't exist later anyway, so who cares if I enjoy life now? This nihilistic view that Mindshift is pushing makes no sense. The one thing I could say I am missing out on, because of my beliefs about heaven, is suicide. Although that doesn't really count until I turn 40. Of course I have other reasons not to kill myself on my 40th birthday, but Matthew 22:30 is the biggest reason. I would hope for Mindshift's sake that he doesn't think that's a bad thing.
It is more important for me to go to heaven than it is for me to treat my family well. Even Jesus says as much, right? When he thinks the end is actually coming, what does he tell everyone to do? It doesn't matter anymore, guys. Don't store up treasures here. Don't save for retirement. Don't care about your family. There's only one thing that matters now. The kingdom of heaven is coming. This false promise for 2,000 years.
This might be the worst straw man yet, because now he's strawmanning Jesus. He never said nothing matters anymore. Retirement was not a thing in those days, at least not the way it is now. He never said don't care about your family. He said God is more important. And it wasn't a false promise.
No, it's all going to end. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy because we aren't doing anything with our stewardship over this planet. And how could we? How could we make good decisions when we think that inexistence is right around the corner?
Wait, what? Inexistence is your view. Did you just argue against yourself? Was that a Freudian slip? Well, that seems like a good place to leave off. I would have preferred a more well-structured list, but it is what it is. First, he argued that heaven is boring, which sounds more like a personal problem, and also really dumb. Because all the alternatives have even less to do, even if he were right about what we can do in heaven. Second, he argued it's slavery, for some straw man of a reason, and again failed to give a better option. Third, at this point it's getting hard to remember all his points, because he didn't make them clear and they just ran together. I think maybe this one was lack of free will, which is basically the same as the second, but also not true in the slightest. And in order for him to argue as such would also argue against us having free will now, which is a completely irrational position. I think 4 and 5 he combined, and said memory and stagnation. Again, not good arguments. We will have our memory, and we will always have something to do and be able to improve or learn in some way. And his last one was just begging the question. I must have forgotten one, but I don't know which. They were all pretty bad arguments that rely on them either not actually thinking about the nature of not existing, being selfish, or just begging the question. And this is a topic that interests him? How bad must his arguments be for the stuff he's not interested in?